Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel. I truly think you're going to enjoy tonight's story, and good evening to everybody out there, and I'm so glad you've joined me and so thrilled you've subscribed to my channel. Anyone who's a dog walker is going to identify with this story, so let's get started. Dear Sarah, my name is Kathy, and I'm writing to tell you and your listeners about my Bigfoot experience, which happened to me at my home in Idaho. I live on my own in a tiny cabin on 20 acres of land with two creeks, Lightning and Cascade, running both through my property. I am close to Top Mountain and Scotsman Peak and a few miles from Clark Ford Country Road. Anyway, where I live does seem very remote, but it's beautiful here, and I simply adore living in this part of the world because it is teeming with wildlife and there's some great fishing spots and beautiful hiking trails around here. I have a large white mountain dog called Puffin, and every day I take him for walks, either along the creek or one of the hiking trails. One day I was walking Puffin on Lightning Creek when I saw the silhouette of what I thought was a man in the water, but as I got closer to the creature, I thought it was a bear. Puffin and I hid behind a rocky ridge because we did not want the creature to see us. Puffin was growling and his ears were back and he was trembling. He really seemed frightened, which surprised me because he's always been a confident dog. Suddenly I heard whistling, and I realized the creature in the water was the one that was whistling. So it couldn't have been a bear because bears don't whistle. The whistling went on for some time while the creature just stood in the water. I honestly do not know what he was doing because he just stood there. After a few seconds I heard a splash, and I looked up, and the creature had a large catfish in his hands. When I saw the hands of this creature, I realized it did not have paws, but human-like hands. Then I saw the creature, and he was striding out of the water on a pair of enormous, large, muscular thighs. He was swinging his arms as he walked, and they were so long that they hung beyond his knees. As the creature stood up, I realized how tall and how big he was. I believe he was 7 foot tall, and his chest and arms were enormous. He would definitely make those huge bodybuilders look small. I watched him killing the wiggling catfish by thumping it with a stone on the ground, and then he sat on a rock, tore the fish in half, and just ate it while his eyes darted from left to right as if he was checking that no one was coming down the path. My dog was still growling as I watched this creature, and he made a snapping sound on a twig. In that second the creature looked up in our direction and sniffed the air, and then he bolted in 6-foot strides into the undergrowth. His senses were amazing, I thought, because he heard the twig snap, and I think he detected our body sense, and that was enough to make him flee. When I got home, I immediately went online to see what the creature was that I had seen, and discovered it was a Bigfoot. On that occasion, I'd never got to see his facial details, but he did have the typical cone-shaped head and virtually no neck. I do remember that. The next day, my friend Pam phoned me and asked me if she could join me for some fishing at the creek, and I thought it was a good idea. I did not tell her about my Bigfoot encounter the previous day. When she arrived at my cabin, we had coffee and went for a brisk walk along the trail with our dogs. She had brought Percy along with her. He is a cross between a Rottweiler and a black lab, and is a highly intelligent animal. He and Puffin just love playing together, and they love swimming and chasing rabbits. As we were walking, Percy got very excited and started barking at a particular spot under a tree. As we got closer, we found a strange nest made out of grasses and twigs, and there were some carcasses in this nest. "This is a nest of some kind of predator," said my friend. "But what? That's the question. It smells really rank." "It reminds me of rotting garbage," I said. "No, worse than that," she said, "like roadkill that's rotting and days old." Puffin, my dog, was burying his nose in the nest, and he grabbed something in his mouth and scurried away with it quickly, with Percy running behind him. Both dogs were wagging their tails viciously. "Puffin," I called, "come here, give it back. Puffin, come here, give it back. Drop it, drop it, drop it now." Puffin was in no mood to listen. Whatever he had in his mouth, he was not going to relent of it. Finally, I managed to get Puffin to drop what was in his mouth, and he surrendered it, but it was with a lot of persuasion. Finally, with a great deal of reluctance, he dropped the furry, bedraggled mass on the ground at my feet. But before I had a chance to see what it was, Percy now had it in his mouth, and he was running off with it with a look of total exaltation on his face. "Oh no," I groaned, "not again." "Percy," we called. "Percy, come back! Percy! Percy, drop it, drop it, drop it now! Percy!" Percy, we called, but he had galloped away like a horse. He did not want to let go of the prize he was carrying in his mouth, and he was even being more resistant than Puffin had ever been. Finally we caught up with him after some brisk walking, and there he was lying on the ground behind a bush of some kind. He was chewing a coyote head, which he was clearly enjoying. We saw that he had the bone in his mouth and was tearing off the flesh and eating it hungrily. "That's disgusting, Percy," I said. "Give it to me now." But Percy was not listening. He let out a warning growl as he continued to chew at the furry head with his long black paw holding it firmly in place. Suddenly we could hear the sound of a heavy bipedal creature walking towards us very quickly and rushing through the undergrowth like a steam engine on full throttle. The next thing I knew was that Percy was yelping and doing a somersault in the air. It was then that we saw him, and he growled like a savage. It was the Sasquatch that I had seen from the day before, and he was furious and unforgiving. He had hurled Percy into the air and had reached out to retrieve his coyote head from the terrified dog, who was now hiding behind my legs and trembling with fear. The Sasquatch regarded us briefly through his brown eyes, then looked at Percy and growled at him directly, as if to say, "This is my coyote head and not yours." He gave Pam and I another glance, and then in about 3 long strides was gone. It all happened so fast that Pam and I were too shocked to even be afraid. After the Sasquatch had left, we could smell the rotting odor we had smelt at the nest, only this time it was 1,000 times worse. Pam rushed over to the bush and hurled out the contents of her stomach. "It's that smell," she said. "It's just made me want to vomit." What the hell was that creature?" she said. "I've never seen anything like it before. The face and hands were almost human." "It's a Bigfoot," I said. "I saw him yesterday." "You knew that creature was out there, and you did not think to tell me?" she said, sounding furious. "That thing could have killed us. Did you see the way the creature flung poor Percy in the air? I thought he was going to kill him." "So did I admitted. Pam bent down on her knees and cradled the terrified dog in her arms. Poor Percy. Poor Percy," she said. I looked around for Puffin and guessed he'd run all the way home in fear. I knew my dog well enough to know he'd run off if he got scared. I was right, I was to learn later. If the creature ate a whole coyote, why did he not just kill Percy? She asked. I mean, that coyote head could have not been much of a meal. It didn't have much meat on it, did it? I don't think it's about the meat, I reflected. I think the dog took something that was his, and he was possessive about it. Wow, that's a good way of putting it. I wonder why he knew our dog had stolen the coyote head. I think these Bigfoots can hide and watch without us even seeing them, I said. Wow, said Pam. When we were examining the Bigfoot nest, I did have an uneasy feeling that I was being watched. I felt it too, I admitted, but I thought I was just being silly. After my Bigfoot experience, I did not give up my walks with Puffin. They always say that if you fall off a horse, you should get back on it. I was not going to allow fear to rob me of enjoying my property and my beautiful home. No chance. When I do venture out with my dogs, I do take a hunting rifle with me for precautions. A day after our encounter with the Bigfoot, I put a bunch of bananas, a bag of unsalted peanuts, and some red apples into the nest as a way of saying sorry for taking your coyote head. I hope he understood that I was reaching out to him. Well, I have not seen the creature again or around my property, but I do sometimes hear wood knocks and whistling, so I guess he's still around. Hope you and your listeners enjoyed my story. Until next time, good night.